we're doing that, I'm wondering whether to kick everyone off with a very tiny mini story exercise just in the chat. And normally we would be doing this in pairs and kind of meeting each other, and it'll be an intimate conversation. But for the purposes of today, people come across the term glimmer before, which is the opposite of a trigger. So if you could have a little think about a tiny glimmer, so it could be anything at all. It could be the way that the leaves blew in the tree. It could be a flower that you saw. Often it does relate to natural things, but not always. It could be anything at all. Something that made you smile, a little glimmer that gave you a little, oh, that's nice. And it could have just been for a few seconds. If you could just share in the chat any tiny little glimmers that you've experienced in the last few days, if there's any tiny little moments, that would be fabulous while I try and
They're coming in
share mine.
already, Anna.
Good, good.
Sunset, Rosilly Bay in Swansea.
Right.
Lovely. Oh, a rainbow on the way to work. That's lovely. These are great. Oh, stormy green waves. Rabbits across the fields.
Ooh,
Oh, that's nice. See, I don't
so-
see that very often where I
oh,
am.
these are coming thick about. Often people get a bit stuck with it, but obviously people have been, yeah.
You're all very
This is good.
positive. It's a lovely positive group this morning.
Yeah, good, good.
Oh, meeting two new puppies in the village. Megan, I'm with you on that.
Amazing. Oh, ducklings, nice.
Oh, they're lovely.
Can everyone see my
Really sorry,
screen?
Anna. Someone dancing outside my window to entertain my cat from Audrey. That's lovely.
I love that.
Oh, nice. Sorry, carry on, Anna.
No, can everyone see
Just
my
feeling,
screen? That's
yeah,
just
I can see your screen.
yeah, some thumbs up. That's good. Okay. So we're going to be talking about storytelling kind of more broadly, but our I guess our expertise is probably sits within digital storytelling. So we'll be going into more detail around digital storytelling for this session. Um, So you've already been kind of sharing in the chat who you are and where you come from, but we'll start with a little bit about us and I guess we need to share a glimmer as well. Hilary, are you happy to kick us off with a bit about you and a little
Yeah.
glimmer?
Yeah, that's fine. So I'm Hilary Dyer. I am Scottish, but I live in Wales. So I'm honorary Welsh and I start my Welsh lessons tomorrow. So that's very exciting. I have a background in therapies and I worked with story massage with children with learning difficulties. And also, I'm a mental health nurse. And when I was nursing, specifically within the field of mental health, it kind of sparked my interest and curiosity about how we could improve care by listening, by truly listening to patients, not just reading their notes, not just having the handover, not just accepting what was being said. So that led me on to doing a master's by research in which I examined the impact of digital storytelling for health. And whilst it wasn't primarily focused around mental health, I brought that background and that focus and lens with me. I'm now an independent researcher, a storytelling consultant and facilitator, which sounds very grand, but I just all things story if I can. I've worked a lot with the University of South Wales. I've delivered a master's module in citizen media for Cardiff University, and I do a lot of independent training quite often with Anna, who is my partner in crime whenever we get the chance. That's probably enough, Anna. I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Hilary. Oh, your glimmer.
Oh, my glimmer. Oh, my glimmer is my dog's nose in the morning. When he pokes me with his nose and it's cold and there's something horrible about it, but also there's something really cute about it because he's just lovely and he always wags his tail when first thing in the morning. So yeah,
Thanks,
my
Hilary.
glimmer.
So I am Anna Sashitsky, and my background is within third sector. So I've worked within various charities and organisations for almost 30 years now, predominantly around kind of people having a voice, advocacy, campaigning. I've been a service user involvement officer, so kind of making sure that people have a voice within decision-making processes. But kind of alongside that, I'm also did a master's in drama. So with an interest in kind of autobiographical performance and kind of that intersection between how the arts might support people to have a voice within, I guess, decision-making powers, but also um, around kind of the different qualities and things that story and the arts can bring to us personally, as well as being able to influence and impact more widely beyond that kind of personal. Um, yeah, as Hilary said, we've worked together through the Georgia Evans Centre for Storytelling based at the University of South Wales. We're currently working towards developing a digital storytelling training course for the university. So yeah, if you're interested in that, we can share details later. Still in development. I'm also a work for Cardiff Met at the moment, capturing stories from women with cystic fibrosis. Again, lots of digital story projects. In fact, currently doing a project with Platform, so a different part of Platform, gathering some stories as part of a most significant change process. So lots of different kind of routes around storytelling, but particularly oral histories and digital stories. And a glimmer for me was the thunderstorm this morning. I don't know whether everyone had that, but it was quite exciting. So yeah, lightning and then thunder very soon afterwards, which means, isn't it like one elephant, two elephants, how many miles away it is? And it was not far away. So that was like, yeah, like a little child, very excited at the thunder and lightning this morning. So that's me. So, little overview plan for the session. Hopefully, we do talk a lot, so we'll hopefully get through everything. Hello.
I stick to it. So the idea of this morning is really to provide an understanding of what digital storytelling is. So we're going to consider what makes story relevant and valuable, look at how organisations might want to use stories, and consider what's involved when working with stories, because it's a little bit more involved than just having somebody talk to you. We'll also have a brief look about how digital story has resulted in change, and hopefully you'll see that as we go through. It's just part of the process. And the one thing which we don't have a slide on, because it runs through absolutely everything we do, is ethics. So we'll constantly be talking about ethics as we move through this morning. Yeah, so I think that's probably just a bit of a roundup of what we're going to try and get through in the next sort of hour. Okay.
So, I guess the starting point, and if you can make use of the chat function, is what is a story? What does it mean to you when you hear the term story? So, if you could have a little look. In fact, I've realised I don't think I can see the
I
chat,
can see
so
the
I'm going
chat.
to rely on you, Hilary, for
That's fine. No, no,
yeah.
I'm
So if
watching
people
the
could
chat.
just anything that comes to mind at all, like, so what do we mean by a story? Oh,
Someone's
the bells
journey
are
and
ringing.
experience from their own perspective. Lovely. Version of events. It's what knits us together. Lovely. A narrative. A method of communication. Conveying a meaning or message. Can you see these, Anna?
I
No.
can now. It was
You
weird. The
can now.
bar
I'll stop
disappeared,
reading
but
them to
it
you.
appeared again. Yeah.
Yeah. Means of understanding experience. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, an account of events and happenings real or imagined. That's very Joseph Sobel.
Mm.
Lovely. Great. These are really good.
Thank you. Keep them coming in. I'm gonna one of the things I didn't speak about when I spoke about myself was I worked for several years with MenCap, the Learn Disability charity, and as part of that role, so I joined that organisation on an oral history project, which was gathering people's stories around friendships and relationships, and a huge piece of learning around that project was the process itself, which led to a brand new role, and I became the storytelling development lead for Mencap Cymru, and then kind of ended up working across the organisation looking at stories. And one of the things in that role I came across was that lots of people within the organization were like, oh, we're doing storytelling. We're doing storytelling too. But we were all talking about slightly different things, and in some cases, very different things. So the first thing I did in that role was kind of bring lots of those people together, including people with a learning disability, to try and thrash out, first of all, what on earth are we talking about? What is a story? And it it was really quite a painful experience trying to come up with one definition. We had academics, we had professional storytellers, we had people working in the comms team, the research team, people with a learning disability, people with lots of experience kind of doing on the ground, working with stories. And to get to a finite definition, particularly given that a lot of the people we were working with, the spoken word was not necessarily the easiest way for them to communicate their story. So we're thinking about story in its broadest context. What we came up with, and feel free to challenge this because I'm quite sure it's something that'll shift and change. But essentially, a story is a way a person makes meaning of their experiences by sharing them with a listener. That may not be shared with words, it may be through the body, it may be visually, photographs, images, it may be words, it may be actions. So there are different ways that we communicate this meaning, but it's about that sense of, it has some meaning to us, this experience. So there are lots of experiences we have in our lives that kind of just shoot past us and kind of, but it's about that meaning. And then the listener is as important as the storyteller. The story listener it's a co-created thing. A story is co-created. So
Right. So I'm going to invite you again just to have a quick think about what you think a digital story is. What makes a story a digital story rather than just a story? If you want to again just take to the chat and put a couple of ideas in. What are you expecting when you hear the term digital story? I think so far. It's hard to know if anybody's just stumped or if they're, oh, here we go, oh, lots at once. Visual or audio alternative. Something to listen to or watch, visual imagery. Excellent. Lovely. Okay. It's great. Thank you. So what I'm going to do is just invite you to just keep adding them at the moment. But before I talk about our definition and where our digital story came from, I'm going to share a story with you. Now, sharing stories, as we'll come on to find, is quite difficult because quite often people make stories, but then they don't want to share them. They want to share them in a specific place only. So we'll come on and talk about that a little bit more. The story we're going to share with you was created by Swansea Health Board, and I worked with Swansea Health Board and Prue Thimbleby, who was their arts coordinator. So it's actually a story that she made with a lady. I will give you a warning that it's about the story of a death following a cancer diagnosis. So if you don't want to watch this, if this is going to be upsetting for you, it's about 4 minutes 50 in length. So feel free to pop off and come back if you'd rather not see it. So I'll pick up after the story with what we consider to be a digital story. Anna, can I ask you just to play that for us, please? Thank you.
We were coming back in the plane from the rugby in Rome, and he had this terrible, terrible pain. He was really, really in agony. And I said to him, I'm coming up the doctors with you tomorrow, because he was going up to the doctors and getting nowhere. And I saw the GP with him, and I said, there is something really wrong, and I'd like him to have an MRI scan. We can't do that, she said. We've got to follow protocol. And she said, we'll send him for an ultrasound scan. wait for the results. The results came back. She called us up. Good news, she said. Nothing sinister at all. Terry got gradually worse and worse. She said, oh, we'll send him for an isotope scan. This is weeks going by now. They thought that he might have something like rheumatoid arthritis. So we said, right, because he was in constant pain, we'll go private. We saw the rheumatologist consultant. He gave Terry a thorough examination. I don't want to alarm you, he said, but I'm really not positive that you haven't got an underlying tumour. I would prefer you to have a CT scan. Terry went in, I sat in the waiting room. The doctor came out and he said, Mrs. Huxley, I want if you'd come into here with me for a minute. And I knew then, because I knew my husband and I knew. And he said, I don't know how to say this to you, but you've got a mass. So he said, you need to see a kidney consultant. We had to wait for an appointment. We were waiting, but it wasn't coming, so we went private again. He said, we've got two options. We either shrink it first with radium or chemo, and then operate or operate. Terry said, I'd want the operation, get it out in treatment after. And that is what was going ahead. But it had to go to an MDT meeting. They felt that it wasn't a typical kidney cancer. We had to have biopsies then, and we had to wait for the results again. It had to go to the MDT again, and then it was not conclusive. So he had to have another biopsy, and this went on and on and on. And it is coming back non-conclusive, 3 biopsies he had. So therefore, they were going to refer him to a sarcoma team. In the weeks that we were waiting for this, Terry was 6 weeks in the house here, and he was in agony. I kept ringing my GP, and they didn't come down. And then he was here one day and he was absolutely in agony. And I rang the surgery and said, could you send somebody down? Can you bring him up? I said, I can't get him off the settee. He was in such pain. And I was really upset about it, to be honest. She sent a nurse down and she said, something's got to be done about this. And they sent Colin from the palliative care team, and he was brilliant. It really helped him. Well, we waited and waited for the sarcoma team to come on board. And then they turned around after weeks and said that they didn't feel it was a sarcoma. We were like a ping pong ball. Then all of a sudden we heard from Dr. Putney, and she said she felt that somebody had to take onus on this. She would start a course of chemotherapy, and that they didn't know the primary cause, which would be a broad spectrum of chemotherapy. I said, I can't believe in this day and age that we can't do something to find the primary cause. And Dr. Putney took this on board, and then she came back and she said that there was a Mr. Lort that was willing to do a biopsy of his lung so they could see if they could get live cancer tissue. And he was only going to be in for 3 to 5 days. And he died 2 days before my birthday. And what I don't understand is, and I would really like to make this point clear, cancer is so spoken about now. Why don't they look for that first, eliminate that and go on to other things? And then people like Dr. Barrington and Dr. Putney wouldn't get patients that they can't do anything other than palliative care after, rather than a cure. There's big results in cures now with cancer, and people are living much longer with it. And why couldn't Terry have been one of those if he'd had early intervention?
Thanks, Anna. Okay, so quite a hard story to listen to, but that is part of digital storytelling. They don't always need to be, you know, sad or difficult stories, but they do impart a huge amount of information in a small amount of time. And that's part of the power of them. So the story that I showed you again is freely available on YouTube. You can look at it if you want. And I make that point because it's really important when we're talking about consent. We'll come on and discuss that a bit later, but I just want to highlight that we have permission because it's in the public realm to show that story. So what do we think for a digital story? So for me, it's all about context. It's all about providing the background to what's happening with somebody's life. Storytelling started in social movement. That's where its roots are, in social justice, with the Story Centre in California, with Joe Lambert and Dana Aitchley. And in 2003, Daniel Meadows started a project which brought it to the UK. It was called Capture Wales. I don't know if anybody remembers it, but it was kind of sound bites, if you like, from people. It was on BBC Two Wales in 2003, and they were capturing glimmers, instances of people's lives and sharing them with the nation. So it really was the very first time that ordinary people were getting a chance to voice their opinions in the UK. I know they've done it in other platforms, but this was the first time it was done on TV, really. So there are many processes for working with a story, and that will define the way that you make your digital stories. So whether you're working with one person directly, which was the case in the Jean Buckley story, she was telling the story about her husband, and she did that in isolation with a story facilitator. However, you can also work in groups, and these are really beneficial for a number of reasons, and we'll come on to talk about that. As you can see, the images used in that story were all photographs of her husband and herself. But it doesn't need to be that. It can be drawings, it can be collages, it can be found images. The whole point of it is to try and incorporate the images which help to tell the story along. So it helps to create a feeling. A good way to think about it is that you are trying to show somebody your world when you share your story. And these pictures are the cues that help them into your worldview and what you see and what you notice. The most important thing for me, I think, is that the storyteller's is privileged. So whatever the storyteller says, that's it. That's their story. It's for them to tell it the way that they want to tell it. Anna and I have rejigged this because we reckon about 2 to 4 minutes in length. When I was doing the research, it kind of turned up at 2 to 3 minutes in length, but we are struggling now to find stories that are 2 minutes long. It doesn't seem to be long enough for everybody. But as I said, you know, it is really important that you give somebody the chance and the opportunity to tell their story the way they want to. And the other thing that I would say is it doesn't really matter whether it looks amateur or not. It is not about having a perfect story or a perfect presentation. It's about the person, not the polish. So the most important thing is the person's story, the person's voice, the person's feelings. And as you could hear, hopefully, in the Pillar to Post story, you could really capture the emotion that was in Mrs. Buckley's voice as she was talking about her husband. And we think that this really adds to the authenticity of the teller. So that's kind of, for this session, what a digital story is for us.
I can't remember who was leading on this one, Hilary.
I was going to do this bit as well, but I realised that I'm now talking a lot, so feel free to chop in.
No, go for it, go for it.
So these are kind of the very basic steps involved in making a story. And there's so much here to talk about, but we'll just do a very rough, quick recap if I possibly can. So the very first important thing is to identify the purpose, why you're collecting a story. There's no point in just going, this sounds great, let's get a whole bunch of stories, because if you don't know what the purpose is, you can't consent for them properly. When you consent a story, you have to consent about where it's going to be used, where it's going to be shown, but also how it's going to be used. So if it was used for staff training, then that would be a purpose for which it was consented. If it was to try and make change, then that would be a purpose for which it was consented. So you might think about, you would need to show it to a wider audience. So identifying why you're doing what you're doing is really important. I mean, I guess it isn't anything in life, but it really is important to have the purpose nailed down when you start. Consent, I'm not going to go into that too much at the moment, but obviously you need to have consent for the story. You need to think about that if people are minors. You need to think about where they're prepared to share it and what implications that might have. So specifically, if you're working with minors, you might want to think about if they're happy for it to be shared on social media now, when they're, 8 or 10 years old? Would they be happy for someone to find that online when they're a teenager or when they're older? Or what impact might that have for them? And that's not to say that you have the right to edit it, but you must speak to them to make sure that they're sure of the implications. The other side of consent is really capacity to consent. And Anna can speak more to, non-verbal consent and how that can be handled, sometimes through MDTs, through best interest meetings. But all of these things need to be considered. So once you've done all your consent, you know why you're doing it, you've got your consent, then you would capture the audio and images, then you would edit it, then you would agree it with the person, and then hopefully you would use it and feedback. And using it in feedback is really important as well, because when you gather a story, there's an expectation that you're going to do something with it. So I kind of feel like you've got a moral duty. If you're collecting somebody's story and you're telling them how you're going to use it, then you should follow that up and you should use it. But the interesting thing to do is to feed back to them, to let them know how their story was received, how it's been used, what has come around as a consequence. So again, if I go back to the story you've just seen in Mrs. Puxley, she was fed back all about the service and changes that had as a direct impact of the story that she told. So making sure that people understand what's happening with it, understand who's seeing it is really important. And those are just really sort of very flash steps in making and using a digital story. Anna, do you want to add anything there?
I think we'll come on to some of the other bits as we go on. So yeah, I think that covers the basics, doesn't it?
Yeah. Okay, and it's lovely. I'm seeing some comments in there as well. It's saying it's, used by US veterans to get veterans with PTSD to try and get them to seek treatment. That's great. And there is a lot of evidence. I mean, I have stacks and stacks of evidence for my master's. If anybody is interested in evidence to back up, please get in touch with me and I can send you a copy of it. It's very boring reading, but there's a section which would probably help.
There's a good summary, isn't there, that
Yeah.
is online, I think.
It is online, but I can share the link and whatnot. Just if you are interested in that and you want to have some more evidence to back it up, then I'm happy to share that with anybody. And also, somebody from Spindle CIC has said that they've shared a link. I'll look at it later. About their work in Torby, which makes them cry every time, and which is great. That's what you want a story to do. You want it to touch you. You want it to generate change. Project in California is the Story Center. Story CENTER, spelt the American way. And if you search that in Joe Lambert Hannah, that will come up. He's written a couple of good books about storytelling. Okay, Anna, sorry. Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk a little bit, I guess, coming back to that purpose that Hilary raised there. And this was a really important part of my role when I was in MenCap, when we were exploring storytelling across the organization. So, like, why are we inviting somebody to share their story? And as I said, we all had these different kind of ideas about what a story was and different understandings. And some of the times when people were saying they were capturing stories, what they were really talking about was case studies in my mind. And Nick Andrews, who's a researcher in Swansea University, he has the term that a case study is about me, a story is by me. So that's kind of how he has the distinction between a case study and a story, and that they are actually different things. So whilst I was at MenCap, we had lots and lots of conversations about these different purposes, like why are we inviting people to share their story? And as Hilary said, this is so tied up in consent and kind of making sure that we are being, I guess, transparent about what we're doing and being clear and honest with storytellers about why we're capturing it. I'm clear with ourselves as well. And I think sometimes we rush into these things and all of a sudden it's like, oh, what's this for again? And actually that can get you in a pickle. And I'm talking from experience here. So this is not that I have got it right every time, far from it. So a lot of this comes from making mistakes, this learning. So in MenCap, we identified 4 different reasons why, as an organisation, we were inviting people to share their stories. So the first one was very much for the individual, and it was very much around well-being for individuals. So it was creating space, making spaces for people to be able to share their stories, and at that level, we're looking at kind of that sense making, trying to understand our experiences, what's happened to us, and just creating spaces where people are able to do that. And a lot of the story work I did whilst working at MenCap was very much around just giving people that time and space, which often people don't have within social care and health settings, where clinicians and support staff are, we're rushing, we don't have time to sit and really listen. And so I think it was quite helpful for me to be kind of this working for the organization, but kind of separate from the day to day, who did have that time to sit, listen, capture, and then share back. And there's again a wealth of research around kind of I guess, the therapeutic value and the kind of way that that can support people's well-being. And we also funded a piece of research around this specifically for people with a learning disability who often don't have the spaces and aren't invited in the same way to share their stories. And I'm going to share with you a little animation, a little bit about that later. But that research was very much around, can storytelling support our sense of self and identity, and therefore our sense of agency? If we don't know who we are, how do we make decisions about our lives? So that was very much on an individual level. The next one, which obviously is very connected to well-being, and actually Social Care Wales have built on this model and have reduced it to 3 different things. And again, we're going to come on to that. But within communities, building connection. We know that stories are a brilliant way of building understanding between people. So whether that's within communities, kind of we have this shared experience, we can kind of, by sharing our experiences, it builds those connections, it builds community, but also kind of for staff to understand what's happened for people, why people may be acting in a particular way or what's brought them to this, building that context that Hilary spoke about, that background to understand, it links very closely with trauma-informed ways of working. Understanding that story really informs then how you relate to each other and how you work together. So stories are a really powerful and brilliant way of doing that. And also the other way for sharing staff stories, for people using services to understand what's happening for staff as well, so that, we're sort of encouraging staff to be a bit vulnerable by sharing stories. So it can be a two-way thing. The next thing is around storytelling for learning. So our research and impact team within MenCap were really interested in stories. Initially, when we spoke, really they were talking about case studies, but actually the more we talked, they became more and more interested in storytelling as a really important tool for learning about the impact. And the most significant change is something that's really being recognised within Wales particularly, but also more broadly as a tool for evaluation and ways of kind of understanding impact. And again, Nick Andrews, who I mentioned earlier, is someone who's been leading on a lot of that work and who's been talking about, rather than focusing on proving, it's about improving, and Platform are doing a most significant change methodology using that at the moment to look at one of their projects. And then finally, which I think is probably the most established ones within kind of social care and within, third sector organisations, I would say, that campaigning, raising awareness, kind of trying to shift narratives, change the way that people are understood and seen, highlighting specific issues for people. And I think that, again, you know, comms teams and campaigns teams, I think, is where kind of storytelling has been used for the longest time and has the strongest understanding. But there are all these other functions and different ways that stories might be used. So I'm going to just share a short animation that whilst I was at Mencat we produced, and it is specifically around learning disability, but I think also may resonate beyond learning disability, and it kind of looks more broadly at kind of social care or any social justice organisations about the value and importance of giving space for people to share their stories.
People with a learning disability are taught life skills. People invest a lot of time teaching us how to make tea, catch a bus, and bake a cake. But many of us aren't given the space or opportunity to share our story. What do you know about us that isn't written in a folder somewhere? Many people with learning disabilities' life story is written and rewritten by others. You might know something bad that happened to us, but no one helped us to tell that story, to order it, to make sense of it. We don't mean stories about bears who eat everyone's breakfast or what's happening down Albert Square. We mean life stories. You might hear them called oral histories, narratives, or digital stories. People with a learning disability don't get to share stories in work or the pub or after school with friends. Instead, our story is always in a form somewhere, only looked at when a bear eats our breakfast. We're always asked about what we want to do, but not who are you. We all had our experiences into an ongoing and evolving story of us. It helps us reflect on who we were, who we are, and who we want to be. Don't be afraid to support us, to tell our stories. We see ourselves and each other in the stories we tell and hear. Stories build empathy. They can help us all understand each other and build stronger and more meaningful connections. Go and start conversations so you can help us tell our stories.
So I think in the second half, when we have chance for conversation, we'll go into a bit more depth with some of these. But I guess this is just to get everybody thinking a bit in terms of your organizations, if you're connected to an organization, some of the things that you might need to be thinking about and considering if you're capturing stories, regardless of the purpose. All of these things would be relevant and things you would be encouraged to consider and think about if you are capturing stories at all. So obviously we've talked a bit about consent and permissions, but it really is such an important part of the story process, like who owns that story, who has control of the story, and all of the work that both Hilary and myself have done, and what we would encourage others to do is that the storyteller owns that story. And if at the end of the process, I'm going through this at the moment, wants to delete it and is not happy for it to be shared anywhere else, and you've spent hours and possibly days working on something and they decide they don't want anyone else to hear it, you absolutely must delete it if they don't want anybody else to see it or hear it. And it's painful and it's horrible because it's a beautiful story, and yes, I'll shut up now because but yeah, it's really important to be prepared that you may not be able to share that story anywhere else because that person owns it. And usually both Hilary and myself use a minimum of a two-step consent process. So at the moment, at the opening point, a consent process to capture the story, so to record any audio or images, and then for them to have it back, to be able to listen, watch, see that story before consenting about who else can see it. So a minimum of two stages. And, some projects that people we know of who've worked on, I think it was a 7-stage consent process Emily worked on. So, lots of checking in. Some people talk about rolling consent. So that's like, yeah, and consent ethics, yeah, as Hilary said earlier, is just at the heart of a lot of this work. Yeah, making sure that you're capturing stories for the right purpose, the right reason, and being honest and clear about it. So if you go in saying, this is totally for your well-being, but actually we'd quite like to use it on our socials, being clear and honest with yourself to be able to then be clear and honest with whoever you're inviting to share their story. Storage, huge thing, often something that gets neglected and forgotten about. But where are you going to keep these stories, and how are you going to know who else is allowed to see them? Are they, kind of ties in with the GDPR at the bottom there, but are they, they are data, and we are talking about, there is personal information there, whether it's the recording of the voice or the images. So, where you're going to keep them, how are you going to keep them safe, how are you going to make sure that only the people who that person has agreed can hear it will hear it. And which leads us on to reviewing and retiring stories. Stories often capture a moment in time. We are not, our identities, our stories are not fixed. They move, they change. And an example that I've used, and Hilary's heard a million times, but I worked on a project, as I said, around friendships and relationships. We had this gorgeous image of a couple kissing on lots of our pull-up posters, all our presentations. It was a beautiful, beautiful image. And we got a phone call kind of 2 years through the project from the team in London saying, oh, could you stop using that image? Because the guy's new fiance isn't that happy about it being used anymore. And so, being able to contact people, get back to them to check that, that things are still relevant, still appropriate to share. And again, being prepared to retire stories. Some stories are just not relevant anymore and should not be used anymore. Support. So we're thinking support for the storyteller, and Hilary's going to go on to that in a moment, but also for story listeners. It's often not easy stories that we're listening to, so protecting your storyteller, but also your story listener. And I've kind of talked about GDPR there. So just some of the things as organisations to kind of consider before you even invite somebody into the space, to have thought about some of these things.
Thanks, Anna. So this is really important. In fact, everything that Anna was talking about was absolutely vital to getting your project off the ground. And so is all this stuff as well, I'm afraid. So handling story of the care is really just what it says. It's about thinking, if you had bared your soul in a story, you would want somebody to take care of it. You would want somebody to look after it and make sure it was used appropriately and in the way that you wanted. And that really is lying at the heart of ethics of working with stories and with storytellers. We spoke a little bit earlier about,
Sorry.
That's okay. And we spoke a little bit earlier about, perhaps if it's a young person, do they want to share it on social media? And there's a sort of same thing here with anonymity or attribution. And by that, I mean whether somebody's identity is kept secret or whether they are credited with the story that they tell. So the choice should be theirs. And a lot of the issues that I've come up against in research is that research funding grants, especially if they have a health element to them, will require the person to be anonymous. But there's a lot of research to show that people who claim their stories and use their stories in that way actually benefit. And I'm trying not to skip ahead to the next section there. So anonymity or attribution should be the choice of the storyteller. Just to give you an example of that, when I wrote my thesis, I wasn't allowed to name one of the people that had contributed, despite the fact that they had given a whole in-depth interview to ITV, and it was on ITV's website. So even although she was completely identifiable, I was happy for everybody to know her story, I still couldn't name her in my thesis because of the grant conditions. So it's just something to think about, because also if you take the story away from somebody, you have to let them know that it's going to be anonymised. That's really important. Changing of minds, as Anna said, people are allowed to change their minds. It's horrible, but it happens. Where you're going to share it. So again, we've spoken about social media, because don't forget that it's difficult to take it back. Even if you put it on a YouTube site and it's protected, once a video is out there, it's out there. It's very, very hard on social media to take anything back. And in fact, Anna, you've got a great example of when people were taking photos of stories in an exhibition. Yeah. Do you want to quickly tell that story? Because I think it's a really good one.
Yeah,
When we're
yeah. So
share
it was an oral history project. We were sharing bits of audio, and then we had photographs that went alongside that. We had exhibitions, pop-up exhibitions in different parts of Wales. And so somebody had agreed for the exhibitions, for their audio and photograph to be included within an exhibition, but they hadn't agreed for it to be on social media. However, we hadn't thought through the fact that some people may be taking photographs at the exhibition and then sharing them on social media. And so we then had to think through and readjust our consent form to say that, we couldn't guarantee that if they're in the public domain in an exhibition, that there is potential then for that to end up, no matter how hard we try, on social media. So yeah, thinking that through can take a really long time. And again, learning through mistakes is often how these things get better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And the other thing to think about is others. So generally stories don't exist in isolation. Even if I tell you about what I did last night, I probably involve somebody else in the story. And so the other people in stories can be very identifiable, but have not consented to appearing at all. So what we're not saying is you just don't have anybody else involved in a story, but you have to be sensitive and think about the implications that might have on the person that's named in the story, especially if they're not cast in a positive light. I've had one story where a member of staff was called out by name, and obviously that wasn't appropriate, because although the story was going to be shared and it was quite right for the person to be upset about it, it also was not fair to the person involved to share that story. So you really just have to think about what you're doing and how to be fair to everybody in the situation. Have you got anything else to add? Well, I guess the other thing that you need to think about with other people is if you're using photographs that have other people in it, you have to get consent. So it would be too difficult to get consent perhaps from everybody, but you get consent from the photo owner that they have the right to share that photo. Just a little aside. Okay, so coming on to the evidence, and this is where I have to really button it and try and be quick, because I realise that we're running out of time a bit as well. So family, friends and carers and the storyteller, I'm going to put them all into one, really, because a storyteller quite often is a friend, a family, or a carer, or a member of staff, or just anyone. So to the storyteller, the benefits really are about reclaiming the narrative, about gaining a sense of control. I will tell a very quick story, and then I promise to run through the rest of it. But one of the key things which happened when I was nursing is a patient came in, a mental health patient who had been a patient for about 20 years. And this person had been really unwell when they had initial contact with services, and they'd thrown a quite good appliance across a room, which probably tells you something about how unwell they were, and the physical state that they were in, that they were able to do that. And 20 years later, I met this person for the first time. And before I met them, the one thing they said is, oh, you have to watch out because they throw fridges. So this person did something once 20 years ago, And that was how they were introduced to me. And I just found that so disappointing. I just think it's awful that, you know, you do one thing once in your life and that becomes your story. It really harks back to, and it's why I like that cartoon so much, Anna, from your story, is it is about what other people have written down. It's not about them. So I see this as a really good way for people to reclaim their narrative, to tell their story about who they are and how they got there, rather than it be a story about the staff experiences with them. So other things for the storyteller: validation, being heard. Quite often, if it's done in groups, you can reduce self-stigma, increase self-compassion, and it can change other people's perception. And I think that's something which needs a bit of thinking about as well. I made a story with a nurse who, when she revealed some stuff about her, realised that she'd given away quite a lot, and she might change the way people think about her. They may think less of her as a person, even though it was a positive situation. It was a great story. But telling your story once it's out there, you have no control over how people are going to receive it. So it's just something to bear in mind and to think about. However, hopefully it changes perception in a really good way, because people understand the context, they understand your background, they understand what you've been experiencing that's led up to the situation that you find yourself talking about. Peer support: there's a lot of evidence about storytelling groups remaining in contact with each other, so they do have that peer support part. In terms of friends, family and carers, there's improved relationships through greater understanding. If you can understand what somebody's been going through, it will help. Quite often it's a space to tell a story and a space to listen, because quite often people are just dealing with things on a day-to-day basis and they don't stop, reflect, or really listen to what's being said to them. And it's a really good place as a starting point for difficult conversations. So there's quite a few cancer stories, and there's a really big research project which is done into AIDS, and it was a good way in for people to start discussing the subject. Families found it quite difficult to approach. So listening to the story then gives a background and gives somewhere to jump off from asking questions. And I really am just going to put us through a couple of the things that I think are important for the last. So for staff, it's communication, hopefully increasing empathy, changing attitudes and approaches, and addressing compassion fatigue. Obviously, there's a lot of learning and reflection to be had. Organisations, again, that's about change, perhaps the design of services, the way that things can be influenced. And then society, so understanding and acceptance perhaps of groups or individuals, and also the improvements that then feed through healthcare, social care or interventions. Sorry, that was a bit whistle stop, but we are really up against it. Sorry, Anna. The one thing that we've put up in these are just the wider context in Wales, and the reason that we've picked Wales is just because it is so well embedded there. So the necessity for organisations to collect patient experiences or service user experiences and also to use them to move forward is actually enshrined in law. So those are 4 bits of legislation which are used to make sure that people's experiences are fed into what we do in the future. Anna, do you want to add anything about that?
I guess the social care storytelling framework was developed in I guess, quite a collaborative way. So there's been lots of people involved with that. And Social Care Wales they have like an evidence of practice built around storytelling. So if you're in Wales and you work in social care, there's lots of things happening and other training opportunities around there. And then Public Health Wales, their People's Experience Framework, which again, if you work in the NHS within Wales, you may have already seen this, know about this, have contributed to it. And again, this was put together with a network of people. So these 2 frameworks, there's quite practical stuff within both of them, and examples and case studies of storytelling within the Social Care Wales one. And then we've got these 2 pieces of legislation that actually refer specifically to stories. Capturing stories is a really important part of, these are things that we should be doing. And I know that lots of other parts of, well, the world, actually, internationally, people are looking to Wales and some of the things that are happening here. as a kind of lead and steer, and there's lots of interest around how these things might be embedded or encouraged beyond Wales. So if you're not in Wales, these things could still be, things that you can take back and encourage in your local areas. So yeah.
And to be fair, we do, we are aware, we work with Leslie, who works for Nice England. There's a lot of good work going on elsewhere. It's just that it seems to have been enshrined in law here. And I think that's what makes it slightly different from Wales, from England and Scotland. Although the Scotland do have their own nice storytelling centre. I saw there was somebody in the chat from Scotland, so check out your storytelling centre. It's great. Okay. Anna, do you want to talk about the network briefly before we hand back?
Oh yes, before in case we lose some of you, but if storytelling is your bag and it's something you're really interested in, you're doing already, and you feel a bit isolated and perhaps people don't get what on earth you're on about, which is basically how this group was set up. I kept meeting people doing amazing, exciting things, and I know that there's amazing, exciting things happening in storytelling all over the place, but quite often we're working in isolation in organizations or institutions that don't quite understand what we're doing. So we created a space to bring together some of those people, and for those people who just had an interest and like curious about it, to come together and reflect and talk all things storytelling so we use the term applied storytelling, but basically capturing stories with people within communities in its broadest sense. So we have academics, storytellers, people working in the NHS, within third sector organisations, independent story facilitators, like a real mishmash from internationally all over the place. If you're interested in being part of that community, it's an online community that meets every 6 weeks. It's very much dip in if you can make it, no obligation. And we have speakers for some of the sessions, and then some are more just reflective spaces. Hilary will share her email address.
I've done it.
Brilliant.
Pop
So
my email
feel free
address
to
in the chat.
contact Hilary, and we'll add you to the mailing list. I'll stop there.
Okay. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Anna and Hilary. Really appreciate it. I'm holding back because I've been involved in some storytelling projects myself, and I've got about 8 million questions. But I'll only bring one of them into the next part of the conversation. Are you able to stop sharing so I can just stick up a couple of my slides, and then we're about to take a break. There we go. Okay. I'll just share this. Can people see that? If somebody can give me a thumbs up, that'd be good. Yeah, cool, thanks. Okay, so on a related note, if you are in South Wales, and I know there's people from all over the place, but for those people who are South Wales, coincidentally next week, Platform are hosting an event at the Temple of Peace. Don't go to the Norwegian church in Cardiff Bay, because that's where I thought it was originally, and I've been corrected. So the Temple of Peace from 10 till 2 is an open free event, where we're going to be sharing some of the stories of some of the work that Platform's been doing. And I know, Anna, you're coming along to that event yourself. So that is an open invitation. We'll put that in the follow-up email should people be interested. The next part of this morning, we've got to about till 11:30, but we'll see how it goes. And we normally lose a few people at this stage, which is absolutely fine. But for those people that want to stay, after we've had a short break, we're going to encourage those questions, conversations, and reflections of what we've heard this morning. For those that are leaving, just a couple of reminders that we've got a couple more sessions scheduled in November. One is around about holding boundaries in systems that don't necessarily work for us. And then for me, a really important one in February about how do we look after ourselves in all of this work. Sometimes it feels too difficult to do that. All of the previous sessions, I know that you mentioned Nick Andrews a number of times. He actually contributed to a session that we did last year His videos are on our YouTube channel as well. So all of the previous sessions that we've run on different topics around being strength based are on our YouTube channel. And again, we'll share that link to the YouTube channel. And then, just so you're aware, Platform Wellbeing are there to support organisations with trainings, to run events like this, to run services as well. So we run a counselling service, supervision service, we'll run facilitated reflective practice. We are here to create space for people to think about how they look after themselves in the work that they do, and how we create better systems together. So that is us. Again, for people who may be leaving, Rachel, if I could ask you to pop the link into the chat for this, we would love your feedback on the session. It really helps us kind of do that evaluation piece on whether these sessions are being useful, and how we develop them going forward and evolve them. Be really grateful to have your feedback. They'll be included in the follow-up email after the session as well. But we would love your feedback on the stuff. I've really enjoyed that presentation, Anna and Hilary.